Thanks, Nick. So first, I just want to give you a little bit of the background on what it is that we're doing with these series. We'll talk a little bit about the position that Blue Whale EV has taken in the market. But one of the most important things that we find in our engagements with our customers is the consideration of all of the educational handoff that occurs in the front end of our consultative experience. Most of our customers are coming to us with very little understanding of the devices themselves, where it is that they should be located on their property, how it is that they're used. So we'll go through a series of frequently asked questions, and I suspect many of them will match up with the things that are of concerns for you today. One thing that we're doing is putting a fair amount of consideration into what are the most popular topics. And so this is actually, as you can see below, it's a session 3 of a 4-part series. The topic that is really become top of mind related mostly to the expansion and the popularity and the availability of a lot of the incentive and rebates that are breaking into the market today. So you're going to hear quite a bit about that. We're going to try to give you an analysis of what are these costs, what do they look like, what are you committing your organizations to, and then what are the incentives. And so, the idea being if there's a capital expense to implement EV charging devices, what's the offset to doing so? So our topic today is investing in EV charging infrastructure, cost breakdown and incentives. Are they profitable or are they just amenities? So our goal obviously is to try and cover that topic specifically. So hopefully that's what we achieve over the next 45 minutes. Secondly, I just want to thank you for spending some time with us. I know that everybody's crazy busy, and our goal obviously is to educate the marketplace and focus specifically on the topics that we think are the most top of mind in the market currently. Next slide, Nick. So by way of introductions, we have 2 folks from Blue Whale here, and our guest speaker is with Zeal. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Scott Swiderski, one of the principals as well of Blue Whale, but my primary role within the organization is Chief Marketing Officer. So a lot of what I do is to, through trial and error, mostly because it is such a new and emerging market, find places where our message can be heard. This involves us speaking on a lot of panels about our experiences, but as well doing other outward bound marketing and messaging efforts like the one that you're on today. Nick?
My name is Nick McNulty. I'm the director of our client success team. I'll say an integral part of many of our installations, and I get to see these projects start from the very beginning as people are just starting to understand what it is that EV charging is, all the way through the end of the project where they are happy with their EV chargers that have been installed and are pursuing some of the rebates to maybe offset some of those costs.
And Eric, you're on mute.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Eric Roseman, Chief Revenue Officer over at Zeal. So I am focused on growing our national footprint, engaging with the largest real estate clients around the country, and ensuring that the market understands our value proposition. And we're here to guide on the EV journey alongside our partners.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Eric. One of the other just quick housekeeping items, if something that you've heard or you've come to the webinar in hopes to get a specific question answered, if you're comfortable allowing us to answer that publicly, we will try to put about 10 minutes aside at the tail end of this webinar, or this hour, and we'll make our best effort to answer that. If for some reason it's a complicated response or a lengthy response, we'll be certain to reach out to you directly. So what gives Blue Whale the ability to speak on a topic like whether or not these EV chargers are ultimately a profit center and or a consideration of an amenity to an organization? Just a little bit of background for those of you that have been through this slide. We tend to repurpose it so that people understand the what it is that we do. Like I said, most of our engagements in the beginning are very consultative. Our customers, tend to have a moderate idea of what they're trying to do. They've got tenant influence that's suggesting that they need to have these at work, or their retail centers, and retail is hoping to attract a new type of customer base. But Blue Whale in general, really from the beginning of that conversation that I just mentioned, all the way through the completion and implementation and installation and commissioning of EV chargers, we handle all of that. So we're self-performing at all of our work. Some of the terms that have popped up in our industry are things like turnkey, make ready. These are all terms that are associated with things like implementation and installation. So we manage, the expertise around the electrical components. We have internally our own engineers. We manage the permits with the counties that are needed to get these devices into the ground. All of the construction elements, the standing up of the device and the turning over the device. So really a turnkey end-to-end type of experience with us. If we were to create a diagram on what this looks like for the majority of our clients, phase one, what we call site planning and prep, there's just a lot going on here. Generally, as I mentioned before, we don't see many of our customers coming to us with a set statement of work, or for that matter, a requirement document. Some of our public sector folks do tend to be in the position of having this type of documentation drawn up, but there's quite a number of unanswered questions, even as we start to approach the how it is that we're going to do this. So phase one, a lot of turnover around design and scoping, site assessment and site preparation. Phase two, really dealing more with what I would like to refer to as the construction elements, the installation and the commissioning. And then phase three, acting as the activation of the device. Customer onboarding, ongoing support, but really the configuration. A lot of questions being asked of us about how do these things work as EV drivers are approaching the devices that you guys have set for them. What parameters do we have? Are they public facing devices? Can they be found through things like PlugShare? What are the rates that I can use to be within line of other devices that are in kind of similar geographic areas? So all that happens in phase three. And this team that we've put together at Blue OEV obviously consists of a lot of areas of expertise, but it covers everything from what we do in phase one, phase two, and phase three. Next slide, Nick. I put this list together, living and breathing in this industry every day. We get a lot of questions. And so, in my mind, given the topic that we've chosen to speak to, hopefully these 12 questions, if not one or many, are relatable to the why it is that you guys decided to join us this afternoon. So let's go through a couple of them. This is what we're going to try to cover in terms of responses for the questions that we're getting most often. So what is the cost for my company to implement EV chargers? Very high level question, obviously, and in certain cases difficult to answer, and we'll explain why. How does the EV charging device charge our customers and at what rate? This is not a preset thing, I guess. It would be the first answer to that. This is a configuration of rates. This idea of revenue sharing, is that a capability? And if so, how? That's a lot of what comes up around that specific item. Number three, will the EV chargers become a new source of revenue for my business? They absolutely can be. And we would need to define what that requirement looks like. Are there different unit costs for L2s versus L3 EV chargers? The answer is yes. Some of you that are researching this industry are beginning to learn that these charging devices behave in different ways. Some of them are being referred to as fast charging, which would be more consistent with what the L3 products are today. But the L2 products, I think, are the most common of the devices that we're setting currently. You know, what are the charge times? How do the vehicles respond? What are the costs associated to do so? Define a public-facing charger versus a non-public facing charger. We have customers, and we're going to talk about it throughout the next 30 to 40 minutes. You know, retail would be a perfect example of where I might put a public-facing charger. It can be found in the app environment today through PlugShare and others. It's how it is that if you're driving EV, you're capable of finding an available charger. And then there's something referred to as non-public facing chargers. These are, you know, generally devices that have been set for amenity purposes. They tend to be what I like to call membership based. So either a real estate management company has provided them specifically for their tenant, or the tenant has set them specifically for their staff. And they don't have any interest in drawing traffic. And they make these charging devices available typically at no cost in those scenarios. Can the EV chargers be built into an HOA expense? This comes up all the time because it's an emerging market, and because there's a transition, obviously, that's occurring. You know, most likely the number of EV drivers tends to be on the smaller side of the total number of occupants in a multifamily type situation. So if I'm not an EV driver today, however, I commit funds to my HOA expense, why am I paying for something that I don't use? And so we've been able to solve for that in many different occasions. How important is the percentage of utilization on the EV charger device to my break-even point? I'm not going to answer that one too much because I saw Eric's slides in advance, and he does a nice job around ROI and specifically what utilization means to my break-even point. However, it is extremely important. Will my current incentive and rebates be enough to cover the entire cost of the EV charging devices? There's several different numbers that are floating around out there. In my next slide, I'm going to tell you, you know, the why it is that this is somewhat difficult to answer. The number that I would give you today, assuming, you know, your facility is eligible for the majority of the richer rebates currently. If we look at the cost of the device and we look at the cost of actually performing the installation and to make ready, generally there's somewhere in and about 60 to 85% of the rebate covering the entire cost. So this is what's obviously having a lot to do with people pursuing this and wanting to get involved, because there's such a significant offset with the available incentive and rebates. What incentive and rebates in my business are eligible at this time? That's a question we're going to answer. Nick on our client success team addresses the specifics, the availability, the timing of a lot of incentive and rebates in markets today. So we're going to have Nick answer that in just a few. Do the devices provide a revenue share for all the parties involved? So what is all the parties involved? Well, depending upon the type of situation, I think the first question that you might think of is, you know, the revenues that come in off of these devices, do they go to one party, or are they capable of being, you know, shared with multiple parties? The answer is both, right? So they can be, in certain cases, made only available to one party, and in other cases being made available to multiple parties. And I think Eric's planning to touch on that as well. Along with the FAQ for 11, what is the considered return on investment for the devices? Does it happen overnight? What expectations should I be setting for myself? A lot of this goes back to two things. One is the percentage of utilization of the device, and then obviously the rate and how much of that income, how quickly is made available to the owner of the EV charging device to offset the upfront CapEx expense. If I choose to not implement the devices, what is the impact to my employees' business and tenants? I treat this question as kind of a subjective answer, because I don't think you're going to have a choice. Eventually, there's going to be a scenario at some point to be determined, whether it's 2028, 2029, 30, where, you know, there's likely to be 20 or 30% of the vehicles on the road being EV. And so What I will tell you is that EV drivers today, they want to charge at home, which is really today where the majority of the charging is occurring, but they want to charge at work, and they want to charge in the hotels that they're planning to stay in, and they want to charge, while they're playing golf or they're at a recreational event, or the family's decided to go out for dinner and they plan to charge in those locations. So not implementing these devices, I think eventually, will leave you without the idea of having, EV charging as a coverage model. This specific topic hopefully gets you a little more comfortable on, expenses associated with putting them in, and then ultimately the offset of the actual expense based on the incentive and rebate, along with the consideration of what a true ROI looks like after having put these devices in. Next slide, Nick. So this is a very typical install. So the parameters of this example are, two L2 EV charging stations. These EV charging stations can be either set up under a single port or dual port. So in theory, two devices could equal 4 ports, allowing for 4 vehicles to simultaneously charge. This is why it's always a little bit difficult for us to determine if there's neutrality in the total cost of implementing the device. Some of our customers have done some future proofing with some of their newer products, and they've put conduit in the ground in anticipation of building, an EV charger fleet center for their facility. Others have not, which of course incurs costs. But these are the kinds of things that go into incurring costs. The design, obviously, what is it that we're doing? Engineering and managing to the permits. What electrical components are needed. In certain cases, we walk into facilities where there's, to the extreme of plenty of available power. And in other examples, there's not enough sufficient power to even run the L2 devices. So, what is my next move? Commissioning and training carries an expense. Utility expenses. This sort of goes back to, the number of devices that you intend to put in. Am I going to need to involve the utility to provide me with additional power? What does that look like? And again, we're kind of dealing in some fairly significant ranges when we talk about these things, all of which obviously have, very different costs associated with them. EV charging devices, pedestals, what type of devices? I talked a little bit earlier that there is a significant difference between an L2 device and an L3 device. Very different cost models, obviously very different performance models around the devices, but this is something else that we would need to know in order to make a determination as to what the total cost might look like. Most of our projects finish out with some aesthetics. The image that's on the screen today, you can see the devices have been set. There's painting and line striping. In many cases, to avoid the device from being damaged by the driver, we're setting wheel stops, bollards. People like to introduce signage to let folks know whether they're public or non-public, or where it is specifically that their EV charging devices are being placed. And then lastly, some form of ongoing maintenance, right? So these devices, they're software based. There's a connectivity component that's associated with this. There are consumables that are functioning, in these devices. There's wearables that I like to call, whether it's the nozzle itself or the cord or whatever. Some of these things break down over time based on usage and seasonality and so forth, and they need to be replaced. So with all that said, a typical, L2 EV charging station project tends to come in and around a cost with everything that I just included of about 18 to 25K. So let's kind of keep that number in mind. And as we go through the extent of this webinar, we'll get a better idea for what amount of that typically is offset. Now, I mentioned earlier that assuming that your organization is eligible for a lot of the current rebates, whether they're federal, whether they're state, whether they're coming from the utility, about 85% of that traditionally is being offset. Next slide, Nick. So we see a lot of customers. This range of customers, as you can see, everybody from public sector to retail, commercial real estate, multifamily, fleet. The hospitality industry is a wide-ranging group of folks, whether they're specifically in retail and or they're in the hospitality industry or possibly a hospital. Everybody is moving towards this, whether they're in kind of phase one of the implementation plan, or they've made the determination that these have become quite popular and that there are quite a number of EV drivers visiting their centers, and they're in their phase two, phase three deployment stage. But anyway, I just wanted to give you a sense for all of the type of customers that are getting involved with us today. Quick example of the Zeal technology. It's a key partner for us. These are their L2 devices with retracting cord systems available. You can see there's aesthetics that have been provided to this specific project. I think it's kind of obvious that this application was in a parking garage. So in cases where we have little or less network capability to communicate with the devices, Zeal has been an outstanding product for that type of application. Next slide, Nick. All right, so I kind of covered the front end pieces, hopefully set the expectations of what both Eric and Nick are going to speak to. But I'll turn over this next portion to Eric Roseman to talk about EV market trends and industry insights.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Nick. And thanks for all the attendees for joining us and learning more. What I want to speak to is kind of the biggest question that people come in with when they talk about electric vehicle charging, which is, what's my payback? What's the ROI? And why should I do this? So with that, I want to break this in. Nick, you can go to the next slide. I want to break this down in the two forks in the road. Why should I do this indirectly? Like, do I need to do this? Is it an amenity? What's the qualitative reason to do this? And then what's the dollars and cents direct return on my investment for doing this? Like, if I put $1 down, when am I going to get that dollar back? So to break that down, at its highest level, many people see this as an amenity, but instead of an amenity, I like to rephrase it as a necessity, because this, putting in electric vehicle charging, you are attracting new residents, new tenants, new shoppers, right? New people to your property. And then you're retaining and keeping happy the existing ones, because this is being seen as a must-have. How can you not have this if you're going to have an office building, a multifamily building, a retail center in 2023 and beyond? So that's the indirect. We'll talk about that. And then the direct, I like to liken this to a vending machine. You are putting a vending machine on your property that dispenses electricity instead of a Snickers bar. And there's a margin, there's a profit margin built into that. So those are the two areas that we talk to our customers about, and that you all understand yourselves as real estate owners and service providers. So next slide, Nick. So let's talk about the indirect. Looking at the Baltimore, Washington metro area, less than 15% of apartment buildings in the DMV have charging stations. Now that's just apartment buildings. If you look at office buildings, you look at retail centers, it's far less than 10%. So therefore, I look at that as a differentiation opportunity to put in electric vehicle charging. And because if you look at the top right, 90% of charging happens in the same place that you charge your cell phone. That's at night and during the day. It's generally not at a Starbucks or a Quick and Shop or whatever. So it's the places that people spend longer periods of time that they expect to charge their car. So you see this demand for charging, and you see this lack of supply where people sleep and where they work. And so that is the opportunity. That's the green space for Blue Whale and for Zeal as partners to satisfy your needs. So let's talk about that use case, because if you are a renter in Baltimore and you're driving an electric vehicle today, that means the 15% of the buildings that have an electric vehicle charger is going to become a lot more attractive to you as a renter. Or if you are a resident and you live in Washington, D.C. or Bethesda, and you just purchased an electric vehicle or you just leased an electric vehicle, when your lease comes up, looking at EV charging is going to be a new criteria. And so we see this trend from an indirect amenity necessity, similar to pet policies, when pet policies became a thing in the multifamily space throughout, I think it was in the 80s, it was sort of formalized. So this is sort of the crux of it, of why you need to do it before you start really thinking about what's my payback period. So you need to be thinking about, if I put this in, will I attract and will I retain, and will I be able to increase rents, or will I just be able to maintain occupancy? And that's obviously the most important thing about running a real estate asset. Next slide. One more stat I wanted to show here. When JD Power and Associates and some other groups, SEPA, went out and did studies, they found that over 50% of the American public said that their next car is going to be an electric vehicle. And it's not just, for those that don't know, I mean, the cars that are on the road, there's over 125 models today, and there's 500 planned over the next 2 years. The price point or the price parity is such that an electric vehicle will be cheaper to purchase and lease than a gas car. And so SEPA found that 84% of renters who do not own an EV are more likely to consider a rental property that offers it. So it's the chicken or the egg thing. So going back to the last slide, if less than 15% of buildings in the DMV have EV charging, then they are positioned to win more business than those 85% that do not have an electric vehicle today. So again, this is a leading indicator for building occupancy and for lease for new leases. So again, this is another statistic that I was sharing before. Over 50%, the next car is going to be electric. So if you do a little math, double digit, but low double digit percentage of your tenants will be driving electric. So every day with many of our clients, when we put charging stations in, we see a trend line that more people are showing up that are driving electric. So it is very much a build it, and you will continue to see these numbers and the adoption increase. Okay, so let's pivot to some real numbers. Let's talk about direct ROI. So you're an owner, you own assets throughout the Maryland, one of the metro areas, and you agree you need it as an amenity, right? It attracts tenants, you're retaining tenants, but can you make some money off of this? So I pulled some of the statistics of some of our live data, and here is an asset in Washington, D.C. It's a Class A building that said, we're going to put in 8 charging stations. Now, there were already a lot of EV drivers, because that's how you see the trend line is relatively stable. But as of today, there are 156 cars that are leveraging the 8 total stations. And over the last year or so, year and a half, this asset has generated $32,000 in gross revenue and around $28,000 of net revenue when you start taking out transaction fees. That is enough margin to not only cover the cost of the electricity, but also start to chip away at the payback period for these assets. So this is just a quick snapshot of the direct revenue generation that you can expect from a Class A asset. And what you will see is over time, the number of cars using these stations will increase. and the battery sizes are increasing, meaning they're consuming more electricity. So your revenue capture is going up. So when we look at a site, and when Blue Whale looks at a site, they can give you a rough estimate to say, you're going to have a return period in a year, 2 years, 5 years. And that all depends on the asset, depends on the location, and the demographic. But this is sort of, I like to say this is kind of a double whammy bottom line. You're attracting tenants, you're making your property more valuable, and you're getting a payback period of the actual asset. So here's another example. What I want to highlight here is not the dollar size. The dollar size is not, again, not that large, but look at the trend line. As you see these lines going up and to the right, again, that's indicating that the growth rate of EV adoption is going up at your property. And over time, that revenue capture will go up. So in an office asset, you generally have the reimbursable and the triple nets for the electricity to be billed back to the tenants in their leases. So you don't run into the same structure as multifamily. But you can see here that while the revenue is not large, they only put in 4 stations. We expect that this will grow at a compounded growth rate, so that over the next 2.5 years, we'll start to see numbers that approach a payback period. So I would say when you approach Blue Whale, you want to ask questions. Hey, am I getting just the indirect ROI of attracting residents or tenants, as well as what's the rough return on our investment by putting this in? We don't have a crystal ball, but what we can see is the compounded annual growth rates of EV adoption. And in the Baltimore, Washington area, or the DMV, it's in the top 5 of markets with highest adoption across the country. So you can expect to see the direct ROI, or the direct revenue capture. Well, I guess the ROI and the payback period. So the ROI will go up, the payback period will go down, and the revenues will go up as more people drive electric. So those are the 2 main areas: indirect ROI, attract and retain, and then direct ROI. These are profitable. These can be profitable vending machines. So with that, I will pass it over to Nick to talk about incentives, rebates, and grants.
Got it. Thank you, Eric. That's really, really helpful information. And I guess what I'll be able to talk to now is how you can start to offset some of your initial cost to put these chargers in, which are going to get you closer to that ROI earlier than if there weren't incentives, rebates, and grants that were available for you. So to get into it specifically, from a high level, they're all 3. We use them pretty oftenly interchangeably, but rebates, incentives, and grants are not necessarily all the same thing. They are all available nationwide and can be used together to offset some of those costs that you might face. There are 3 main sources that are the most typical that we look at for each job that we are working on, and that's at the federal level, the state level, and the utility level. Most of these levels also have different programs based on what your property would fall into in terms of a category. There's residential rebates that exist, and then what we'll be talking about more today are the business and commercial rebates and incentives that are out there that can help you offset some of your projects. Additionally, there are states that are now starting to roll out, Maryland being one of the first ones to roll out fleet options. These are really great programs that if you have any company vehicles or fleets that you manage as part of your company, these are set up specifically for those types of scenarios. So we'll talk a little bit about those as well. And I've got some examples in the Mid-Atlantic states for us to talk more specifically about. So the first one I'll talk about today is Maryland. At the federal level, and this is going to be the same for each of the states we talk about today, the federal rebate is somewhere between 6 and 30% of your total costs of the project. And the reason that there's a range there, the 6% is the standard amount that you'll get back. So 90% of the projects that we work on, they're looking at 6% of the federal amount that's going to come back to them after their project. If you fall within a specific area that's called or in a census tract, meaning that you're in an area that is outside of, an overly urbanized area, there are areas that you could get up to 30%. One caveat to that is they do require us to use Davis-Bacon wages, if that's the case, which is going to increase the cost of your project some, but that might get offset further by that 30%. So just something to be aware of. At the state level in Maryland, there is a state program that just came out again last month. They reopened it for the new fiscal year. This new program is the lesser of $5,000 per charger up to 50% of the project cost. Most people are not hitting that full 50%, so they're able to get that $5,000 per charger that they're putting in as part of their project. A couple caveats to mention with that. You are required to register with PlugShare and the U.S. Department of Energy in order to qualify for those rebates. That means that your chargers will show up when people go and search where they can find chargers. You can set them as private, but they will show up on those apps as existing. So something to be aware of. And then there is a cap per year on the maximum amount that one company can claim. So if you have multiple sites, you can go and get multiple versions of this rebate per site, but you are going to get capped out as a singular company after you hit that total. And then lastly, there's the utility programs, especially in the greater Maryland area and DMV. There are a lot of utility programs that exist. BGE has been especially good about putting out programs. They've got their new fleet program, which is the one I mentioned earlier. It's just starting to come out this year, but they will cover up to 90% of your make-ready costs, 100% if you fall within one of those disadvantaged communities that we talked about. And that's $15,000 per site. So not a small amount. With the level 2 charging, they have another program that's out right now that's $5,000 per port, up to 50% of your project costs. And then there's the DCFC charging. If you're going all the way up to a level 3 charger, they've got $15,000 per port, up to 50% of your project costs. So the nice thing about these programs is that they can be used simultaneously. If you qualify for all three at the same time, you can stack those rebates on top of each other, which is really going to take the greater chunk out of your project costs away from you. So moving forward, we're going to do the same thing in Virginia and DC. I'll move through them a little quickly since I just went through, kind of high level in Maryland. But Virginia right now does not have the state rebate, unfortunately, but they do have the federal rebate, which is the same as it was in Maryland. And there are utility rebates that exist as well with 3 different utility companies in Virginia. The one that I've outlined here that is one of the bigger ones in Virginia is the Dominion commercial and fleet programs. As you can see here, the fleet programs will cover up to 50% of your project cost, and it's a custom rebate. So there's no cap on the amount that can be, but there is a program limit of 165 chargers. So in almost all of these programs, you're looking at first come, first serve. And you're also looking at, there's a set amount of dollars and a set number of chargers. So if you're looking at, should I wait to do my project? The answer is often, if the rebate is there today, you should do it today. So something to be aware of there. And then moving out of Virginia into DC. DC does have federal, state, and utility rebates. The federal rebate is the same, as I said it would be. The state rebate, they have the DC Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Tax Credit. This is not a standard rebate, so it's not coming back to you as a check or something like that, but it is a tax incentive. So at the end of the year, you would file and you can get back the lesser of $10,000 per station, up to 50% of your project cost. So something to be aware of there. Now, the one caveat with that program is it does require that the chargers are fully accessible to the public. There's a limit on the number of hours they can be inaccessible, meaning that for the majority of the time that they are up and running, anybody has to be able to pull up and use those. Lastly, there's the utility rebates. Just a quick look. Pepco offers 2 commercial programs right now. One piece I would push or point out is that the multifamily applications are no longer being accepted, but they are open to workplaces. So something to be aware of there. And then the public charging make ready program, this is just for their level 3, but they will cover up to 100% of the utility costs to bring the power to your site if you're going to put in level 3 charging. So that is something to be aware of. If you're going to put in a level 3 charger, oftentimes there's not the adequate amount of power at that site at that time. So you'll need to bring in power with the utility company. In this scenario, the utility company is going to cover that cost for you. So something to be aware of. Lastly, there are also other grants and other programs that exist outside of the 3 main ones, the utility, state, and federal. Some examples of that are the NEVI grant. The NEVI grant was a federal program that was pushed out to all 50 states. Each state is left in charge of how they want to structure their own program, but some high level caveats or points that are the same for every state are the ones that are listed here. Essentially saying that they've got to be as part of these EV corridors. They can't be more than 50 miles apart from each other. The charging ports must be compatible with all EVs sold in the US, et cetera, et cetera. So things that are shown here. Some other grants and incentives that are out there, just as an example, the CFI grant was the Clean Fuel Infrastructure Grant. Now, the first round of that funding did close back in June, but we were able to go out and help a few different government entities apply for these grants by basically going out, helping them price out the full size of their projects. And then as long as they could cover the initial 20% of that, the grant could cover up to 80% of their total project. So obviously there's a lot of programs that are out there right now. Part of what Blue Whale does as our overview is look through everything that's out there and help you identify how you might be able to get some of these funds back. So that's a high-level version of what the rebates, grants, and incentives cover. If there are any specific questions that you have about your project or your site, you can certainly reach out to us and we'll get into specifics with you.
Thanks, Nick.
Yep.
And thanks, Eric. As you can see, it's complicated. And, you know, this session really was about, you know, talking around the finances of EV charging devices, return on investments, capital expense. We were performing several other sessions that are focused on the plan. So on October 12th, if you'll stay with us in our series, one of the things we are extremely committed to is being a thought leader in the EV charging market, in the e-mobility space. So we'll be talking about the specifics around, you know, that an EV charging plan is needed by our organization. People are really starting to ask about it. What do we do? And so we've decided that was a relevant topic for, you know, a number of the questions and so forth that we're getting in. We've got a couple minutes left. If there's a question, generally what we've seen from these series is that you know, questions that people have, you're welcome to come offline with us. We're happy to engage, talk about whatever it is that you want to talk about. So feel free to do that. We will send this deck around. It's also hosted on our website in our on-demand webinar area. So you can share it with other colleagues that might have missed out. But all of our contact information is obviously available there. And as I said, we're committed to, you know, providing as much of this educational experience for your journey on this as needed. We'll continue to stress what we think are the most important topics, the things that are coming up that are most popular for the conversations and so forth that we're having. Most of the time, we're going to continue to bring in partners. So a big thanks to Eric Roseman with the Zeal Company. They've been an outstanding partner, great products. And I know that relationship is just going to continue to grow and provide our clients with solutions around Zeal technologies. So if you have a question, we've got a few minutes. You're welcome to post in the Q&A. There's one question that's come up, it's from an anonymous attendee, but it says, can you go back to the Maryland tax incentives? Nick, can you address that? You're on mute, buddy.
Too many tabs open. So on the Maryland side, you've got the federal rebate, which is a tax incentive, is the federal side. The state level is actually a rebate program. So it's not a tax incentive, but it's one that you apply for, and then it would be awarded to you. And that is $5,000 per charger, up to 50% of your project cost. And I guess the big one with that is that you just have to register with PlugShare and the U.S. Department of Energy, so that you're a findable charging station. And then in the utility side, for BGE, there's this fleet, well, I guess I'd say the level 2 program is what we're likely talking about here. So you're looking at $5,000 per port, up to 50% of your project costs. So I can share, we just recently did an analysis for a Maryland-based company where they were looking at putting in one dual plug charger at each of their stations, or at each of their locations. And with that in mind, they were getting $5,000 back per charger through the state program. They were getting $10,000 back because it was a dual port station through the utility company. And then they were getting about $1,000 back through the federal tax incentive as well. So you can see on a single charging station, they had the possibility of getting about $16,000 back in rebates. So if you're looking at a project that's, a base cost of between 18 and 25, and you're getting 16 back, that's a pretty good way to cover that. And in certain scenarios, if your charging stations are located closer to the electric room and you've already got the existing power, you might even come out to be a zero cost installation. So something to be aware of there. If you have more questions about the Maryland incentives, please feel free to email me separately. My contact information is included.
Thank you, Nick. There's no other questions that have popped up in the Q&A or the chat at this time. So hopefully you've learned quite a bit. Number one. Number two, that we've helped to provide a little more visibility into the economics of the managing, owning, and implementation of EV charging stations. So this is an exciting industry, obviously, emerging, as Eric said. A lot of what we look at are current states, but we also look at future trends for what it is that's happening. Our DMV location is interesting because it kind of is seated in the middle of a lot of things, meaning it's not the most popular like a state like California, but it's also trending, more towards the top of the adoption rate of EV vehicles. So we have a lot of places that we can go to say, how fast, how quick, what might this look like in 12 months time from now? And we use a lot of that information to continue to share with our clients as we help them to build out these plans. So one more. Oh, okay. Thank you, Nick. So, all right. Thank you for participating with us. We appreciate it. Eric, as always, thank you for, being involved with us. And we look forward to the next up and coming session on October 12th.